and I'm director of the program on Central Asia at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you today to a discussion on the book, on the award-winning book titled Intercommunal Warfare and Ethnic Peacemaking, the Dynamic of Urban Violence in Central Asia, with the author of the book, Dr. Joldon Kutmanaliev. This book talk is part of the series of book talks that we launched this year together with my partner in crime, Leora Eisenberg, PhD student in history here at the Davis Center, and Leora will join us shortly. The book is an in-depth study of the 2010 Kyrgyz-Uzbek clashes in southern Kyrgyzstan that followed the dramatic events of April 2010, the oust of Kurmanbek Bakiev, the second Kyrgyz revolution, second Tulip revolution, Melon revolution. There are many names given to this event, and I have to confess that when we planned this event, we didn't think about timing, but when I was preparing for it, I realized that it was exactly 15 years ago. And on this day today, we are on the 3rd of April, exactly 15 years ago, on the 3rd of April, 2010, General Secretary Ban Ki-moon was visiting Bishkek, and he made a statement expressing concern over the seizure of the government building in the city of Talas by protesters. So we're exactly at 15 years. So it's amazing that we're having this book talk, and we're having Dr. Kutmanaliev with us to zoom in on these events and try to understand what actually happened. Before I give the floor to Dr. Kutmanaliev, let me introduce him to you. He is a researcher at Leuphana University in Germany. He received his PhD in political and social sciences from the European University Institute in Florence in 2017. His research interests include political violence, ethnic conflicts, and post-Soviet politics, along with data analytics and software development in social sciences and education. He is the author of the book we will be discussing today, Intercommunal Warfare and Ethnic Peacemaking, the Dynamics of Urban Violence in Central Asia, published by McGill-Queen's University Press in 2023. The book won awards. It won the Joseph Rothschild Award in Nationalism and Ethnic Studies last year, and the Best Book in Social Sciences Award also last year from the Central Eurasian Studies Society. He has taught for many years at Bishkek Humanities University and the University of Tübingen in Germany. And I'm also happy to note that, as you can find out from the preface of the acknowledgement section of the book, the book writing journey started at the Davis Center, actually, right, in spring 2010. So without further ado, Joldon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nargis, for introduction. So exactly 15 years ago at Davis Center, I was planning to do another research. I was about to do research on political linguistics in southern Kyrgyzstan, and what happened then in June 2010 completely made my prospective research irrelevant, and then it led to my current research, and which is turned into the book that I will discuss now. Okay, so let me share my presentation. And also apologies in my appearance. I had a football accident, so it was a very intense match, and I was going to score a goal, and the defender prevented me with the kick. So basically, instead of kicking the ball, he kicked my head. Okay. So can you see my presentation? Okay, good. Let me set a timer that I don't exceed timing. Okay, thank you everyone who joined today's book talk, Intercommunal Warfare and Ethnic Peacemaking. That is based on my dissertation research. I published it with McGill Queen's University Press in 2023. So let's start. First of all, Nargis already told about some background to this conflict. It was a regime change in 2010, exactly 15 years ago, that produced a paralysis of state institutions, so particularly of law enforcement. And there was a chaotic period when the central government or the interim government lost its control beyond Bishkek, the capital of the Kyrgyzstan, and the conflict between Kyrgyz and Uzbek ethnic groups started in the night of 10th of June in 2010. This was a very violent conflict. It lasted just several days, but the consequences were horrible. Around 500 people killed, around 2,000 wounded, but it's only those who registered themselves in hospitals. Around 2,000 houses were burned, and in addition, there were other forms of violence, including sexual violence, kidnapping, and around 200 to 400,000 of refugees on the both sides. And the most affected locations were Osh City, that account more or less for 80% of total deaths, and to less extent, Jalalabad city. And at the same time, mid-sized towns like Uzgen, Karasu, Nokat, other villages, they were spared from violence. And also some neighborhoods in Osh city and in Jalalabad city, they remained peaceful or at least low violent. So the first outbreaks in June, on the night of 10th of June, produced the atmosphere of fear, uncertainty, so-called security dilemma, where two groups were suspicious of each other, and that led to consequent events. So the question is why we have some neighborhoods peaceful and some neighborhoods violent. So this constitutes the main puzzle of my research. So it's particularly, you can see that what questions drove my research in this book. So this cross neighborhood analysis, and I was puzzled why some neighborhoods with very similar composition, structural conditions exhibited variation in violence, and why different communities also responded differently to similar environmental changes, which was violence in the whole city, in the region. Yeah, so basically, so I wanted to find out what happened on the ground. So I went to Osh and to learn what happened. So this is a map of Kyrgyzstan. You see in the black circles my main field sites. It's a cities of Osh, Jalalabad, and Uzgen. Here's a closer look at these cities. You can see that these cities are particularly on the border with Uzbekistan, and southern provinces in Kyrgyzstan. They have very large minority, Uzbek minority, which in some places constitute majority, depending on the region and on the place. So I think what are the main contributions of this book is how they can help us understand communal violence. So in my book, more or less five main focuses were or focuses of innovation. Like so, first I paid a lot of attention to spatial dynamics. So I saw how urban planning and landscape, road infrastructure influenced communal violence, the spread of communal violence. Then the book highlights the role of local communities, how they prevented violence, how they negotiated non-aggression pacts. I think one of the biggest innovations, theoretical innovation of this book is that I analyzed this book on the level of neighborhoods. So my initial thought was to compare violent and non-violent cities, but then I saw that even within violent cities, you have such variation across neighborhoods. So I thought that would be interesting to find out what happened there. And comparative approach was what I chose. In my research, I'm comparing violent and non-violent neighborhoods. In some chapters, I have paired comparisons of the different neighborhoods. And I hope that this book will serve as some guide for policymakers how to detect potential hotspots and promote ethnic peacemaking. Okay. Sorry. So yeah. I would like to emphasize again the importance of the urban violence, of the analysis of urban violence at the neighborhood level. And by the way, due to time constraints, I will, in this presentation, focus mainly on the three focus areas: local responses, neighborhood level analysis, and comparative insights, with some insights to spatial dynamics. So I think it's important to study at neighborhood level because neighborhood dynamics actually influence microstrategic behavior of local groups, their responses. Also, they can inform conflict management strategies at regional and national levels. Also, they show the microspatial analysis show the patterns of spatial diffusion of violence. So when you look at local level, you can identify how and why violence spread across neighborhoods. And one of my discoveries was that subgroups, not the whole ethnic group, but ethnic group can have subgroups, and those subgroups can actually act independently on neighborhood level. And their cumulative actions, they actually in the end determine whether conflict escalates or de-escalates. That's why I think it's critical to understand how communities prevent violent escalation. As I said, one of my discoveries was I found out that ethnic groups can actually consist of internal groups that have different preferences. So that's why my book examines how microgroups or subgroups interact with each other or with other groups and develop survival strategies in such crisis situations. And it's especially important because traditional literature usually study groups, communal groups or ethnic groups as unitary actors with similar preferences, unique preferences, overlooking the internal division in preferences and their strategies. Groups can fractionalize, and some research already proved that, particularly for Tini-Kristia and Tajima showed on the examples of Afghanistan and Bosnia and Indonesia that ethnic group can fractionalize. They can build alliances with co-ethnics or even with other groups. And I think that the issue of fractionalization remains understudied, especially at the micro scale level and within the urban context. What I observed during my study of Osh conflict, or it's not it's conflict in southern Kyrgyzstan, but the major area was Osh. So I identified basically like four types of responses. Of course, it's just indicative. Some responses were mixed nature. But what I observed was like that neighborhoods either initiated preemptive attacks against opponent groups. Others chose the self-isolation strategy when they close their neighborhoods and try to not to contact with others. And there is also proactive strategies like negotiating non-aggression pacts with their neighbors. And maybe the fourth type of response was interethnic cooperation, which mostly was visible in mixed neighborhoods where people, Uzbeks and Kyrgyz, they decided to cooperate on the neighborhood level, putting forward their neighborhood solidarity in the first place. This is a graphical representation of the local communal responses to the crisis. When the regime was deposed, it brought to the paralysis of state institutions, and then the conflict happened in city wars, which spread to several other towns. And of course, it caused some uncertainty, and the local communities, neighborhoods chose different strategies that led to the variation in responses and outcomes. So there was different outcomes, and you can see this in this graphical representation. Okay, so this one of the tables. Why I'm showing this table, because in the beginning, when I started this research, I considered this conflict as riots. But over the time, I came to the conclusion that we cannot consider this conflict as just as riots, because it actually has a lot of features that we can find in the literature of civil wars, particularly number of deaths, level of armament, the amount of refugees, comparable to conflicts that can be defined as civil wars. But on the other hand, the duration of violence and the level of organization was, we cannot compare it to civil wars, and that's why it has like more riots features. But it's very useful for us to know that this conflict has kind of mixed nature, and this helps us to analyze this conflict better when you also take into consideration the literature on civil wars. So this was actually one of the reasons why I named my book Intercommunal Warfare, not by other name, because I think it was actually a case of prevented civil war. If you compare with other similar ethnic conflicts that were defined as riots, so you see that how much the conflict in southern Kyrgyzstan was intense, because you can see here that U.S. racial riots has less victims, in more than 500 racial riots in the U.S. in the 60s, and in this sense, I think violence in Kyrgyzstan can be more comparable what we can observe from the similar cases in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. This is another table. These fatality tables. I would like to thank Kılım Şamı NGO, which made a great job to record all the killings. And you can see this one of the four tables, and I chose this particular one because it shows a type of mortal wound. So how people died actually. So what was the mean to kill them? So and then see that most of the victims were killed by gunshots. So it's again like in traditional sense riots, you don't usually have killings that resulted from gunshots, and here they constitute majority, and that's why again it proves the point that this ethnic conflict was very similar to civil war, that I defined that it was a case of prevented civil war. And you see the other types of causes of deaths were more like traditional to rise causes of death, like such as stab wounds, cerebral injuries. They constitute the minority of these cases. So this map, I downloaded this map from one of the online resources. It's not correct one, but this map is supposed to show the ethnic composition of the city of Osh. Again, I would like to emphasize it's not correct one. I just show you this map for illustrational reasons. Just you have a sense how segregated city is this. The neighborhoods, most of the neighborhoods are segregated, even for outsiders, for external observers. They can distinguish in most of the cases which one is the Uzbek neighborhood and which one is the Kyrgyz neighborhood. So the reason I showed this map is to explain one particular condition. When first violence happened, the first outbreaks of violence over the city, the neighborhoods, they understood that they cannot rely on the state institutions, and they started building barricades across the borders of their neighborhoods. And that created a lot of ethnic enclaves that coincided with segregated neighborhoods. And this circumstance allows us to approximate this condition to neorealist models. So absence of central authority, it's kind of similar to international anarchy in international relations, where like ethnic enclaves or ethnic neighborhoods, they act like states with the main priority of physical survival. And then what was the result is strategic interactions between these neighborhoods, which produce different and varied micro-scale outcomes. As I said in the beginning, so communities responded in different ways with preventive attacks, negotiations, and self-isolation strategies. And outcomes were shaped not only by strategic factors, but also by, to a large extent, by local, spatial, and neighborhood conditions, spatial aspects. In my theoretical framework, I very much rely on the seminal work by Firon and Latin about the interethnic cooperation model, where they offered this two-level game model. So the two mechanisms I identify from their article is the intercommunal non-aggression pacts that aim to rebuild trust and signal peaceful intention, and intercommunal self-policing, so where the group leaders control their own constituencies, their own neighborhoods to prevent violence. And the argument is that these mechanisms reduce uncertainty, lessens fears through interethnic and interethnic cooperation. So the two-level game can be represented by this slide. So you have to account for balance of power, both intercommunal balance of power, inter-neighborhood, and intercommunal. All these strategic interactions, power shifts influence the final outcome. And also one of the main findings is outsiders kind of intervening variable that could intervene in each neighborhood and shape its own results. This photo shows the probably the residents of one of the neighborhoods expecting attacks from down the road. Unfortunately, we don't have good photos of that period, and I just showing what I found. And the question is, if intercommunal pacts are so effective, why not many all neighborhoods relied on this mechanism? So there are some conditions for non-aggression pacts to be successful, or that they manage their goal. So it's you can see on the slide. So it's one of the main conditions is the presence of legitimate leaders who can control this and self-police the neighborhood. This is again photos. You see on the right photos of intercommunal pact, but this probably was event organized by authorities. The real pacts, of course, they were not so public, and they were more hidden, non-visible to observers, usually including several community leaders from each side. And of course, we don't have photos of such pacts. But here I'm just showing this photo for illustration reasons. And again, I already emphasized that for effective in-group policing, again, you need several key elements. It's a strong social norms in neighborhoods, strong leaders, and sanctions for antisocial behavior. If some groups want to break non-aggression pacts, so the communal leaders should be able to enforce the pact compliance, or in other case, or otherwise to punish violators. I think it was very important to emphasize, because not all neighborhoods had those conditions that help them to effectively self-police the neighborhoods. Again, these photos on the right, you can see a mixed patrol of military and local residents. Probably it's after the violence subsided, but again, it shows how the self-policing was conducted in some neighborhoods. And on the left, you see the representations of security dilemma, and the military actually fearing attacks from neighborhoods and being on the check. Okay, let me proceed to case study. I hope I will be more or less brief with this. And you see that the city of Osh more or less have the same proportion of Uzbeks and Kyrgyz. I said that Osh is very segregated city, a lot of ethnically segregated neighborhoods, and also the surrounding is also segregated. They're surrounded either by Uzbek or Kyrgyz villages. So a couple of words of my research design and methodology. So usually what I did in my book, I was trying to compare violent and non-violent neighborhoods. In total, in sum, I compared about 10 neighborhoods, and also I have a lot of evidence from other neighborhoods. I conducted ethnographic fieldwork between 2010 and 14, 10 months in total, staying in the city of Osh, in Jalalabad and Uzgen, mostly relying on interviews, more than 100 interviews, mostly with community leaders, residents, but also with police officers and journalists. And also I relied very much on visual observations to make my spatial analysis. Here, map, you can see the clusters of destruction in the city of Osh. We don't have such a map for violent clusters, but I can say that violence more or less correlated with clusters of destruction, but not entirely. So you also have violence in southern parts of the city. This is again the same map, but with numerical measures. Probably you cannot see from your screens. And this picture shows the extent of violence. So you could see the collapse of smoke from the whole city. So more or less the whole city was enraged in violence, and there was no such a place as completely peaceful havens where like they even didn't heard about violence. There were, of course, peaceful neighborhoods, but they have to fight for their peace by some by initiating non-aggression pacts or building barricades. And again, this is two maps of destruction clusters. This on the left is infamous neighborhoods of Cheremushki. On the right is the neighborhood is called Kızılkışlak. So you see the clusters or the shape of destructions was different here. In these photos, you can see the cluster on the right, Kızılkışlak. So on the left is a photo that I made from Suleiman Mountain, which you can see on the right photo. And at the same time, the right photo shows the level of destruction. So it's how the same neighborhood looks like. Here you can see the list of different outcomes. It's just again for illustrational reasons. You see that different neighborhoods have different outcomes and different strategies. And let me proceed for the first pair comparison. It's a comparison between Tolokon and Uchar, two Kyrgyz neighborhoods. You can see here, and in the middle is Uzbek, very large Uzbek district of Turan, which is surrounded by Kyrgyz neighborhoods. And in the second paired comparison, I will compare the neighborhood of Nariman with this neighborhood of Turan. This is kind of a nested comparison. The first paired comparison shows so that one of the special aspects that were advantages for the Turan residents is that it is encircled by a water channel, so it kind of facilitated their defense measures. You see these black circles. Those are barricades built across the bridges. There are few bridges, and the Kyrgyz side also did the same. They built bridges on their side. So there was negotiations of Tolokon and Uchar, which Uchar you can see on the left side. They were negotiating with the same group, with Turan, but with slightly different outcomes. And this difference was caused by spatial and contingent factors. And so here you can see the map, not the table, where I compare Tolokon and Uchar, and you see that special factors and contingent factors in Uchar, because it was close to interregional roads, it had to deal with arrival of radical outsiders, and to deal with them, they lost control for the moment, but in the end, the community leaders, they managed to reestablish control over the neighborhood and negotiate a non-aggression pact with Turan. And at the same time, Tolokon didn't have such constraints, and from the beginning, it has no obstacles to negotiate such a pact with Uzbek neighborhood, Turan. So after I finish my presentation, of course, you can ask clarifying questions about these cases. And the second paired comparison is between Nariman. Nariman is in the north of the ocean, and Turan is in the south. So Nariman shows the case of failed in-group policing and broken pact. So if you look at this table, you can see that in many respects, these two neighborhoods are very similar. Actually, they're very similar. And I can say Nariman was in more advantageous position than Turan. Turan was encircled by Kyrgyz neighborhoods, but Nariman was actually close to Uzbek neighborhood. But maybe this condition actually played a negative role, because maybe some of you remember that when Uzbek refugees went to Uzbekistani border, the bodyguards only let in children and women, and the males were turned down, and many of these males were so-called embittered refugees from other neighborhoods that suffered from violence. They were revengeful and they wanted revenge, and they came back from Uzbek neighborhood, came to Nariman. They undermined local authority, and in the result, they undermined all non-aggression negotiations with the neighbors, and the result was violence. So one of the most infamous killings was killing of district police officer, and the crowd beheaded its driver. So there was a lot of chaos, which we cannot observe in the Turan's case. And in Turan's case, local community leaders were very careful in conducting negotiations and in self-control of the neighborhood. Yeah, so in conclusion, there are the key findings of this book. What is important. So I think I will not comment on the last slide, and just I will put it on for your observation, and then I'm giving floor back to Nargis.
Thank you very much, Joldon. And I want to encourage our participants, webinar participants, to post questions in the Q&A tab. Well, let me start. Let me start our discussion by asking you about the kind of studying and narrating this kind of complex events. You note in your book that the international reports published on the events, they were often biased. Yeah, they often biased to kind of for political reasons, for political reasons, ethnic, and so on. And it's understandable, right? When we see something, we kind of try to fit it into the constructs we already have. How do you deal with this challenge of kind of narrating, compressing what you learned, right? For external consumption, maybe not even for external consumption in general. How do you kind of narrate it in a shorter? What's the shorter version? Because, for example, kind of I have sometimes difficulty of explaining January events in Kazakhstan because they are complicated, right? Your book is very granular. It's 200 pages, plenty of evidence, and you kind of different narratives by different participants of the events. How do you deal with this challenge? How do you explain these events to somebody kind of in a shorter format?
Okay, thank you, Nargis. Yeah, so you're right. I think first reports were okay. They were useful because they were fresh reports, and they gave some sense to understand this conflict. But of course, there was too little time, and some of these reports didn't dig deep to learn the real causes of violence. And in this sense, yeah, so these reports, I saw that how they alienated the Kyrgyz side because those reports one-sidedly blamed the Kyrgyz side without going to deeper investigation. And I saw it from my interviews with community leaders, mediators, who actually were trying to de-escalate that violence, and they were yeah, they were regretting that international reports were not so precise. But what helped me first, okay, from the very beginning, I decided for myself that I have to do an extensive field work, talking to people on the ground to find out what's happening there. So that's what I did, mostly talking to community leaders because they kind of they knew the information, and but also from multiple conversations in everyday life with local citizens. So first, like when you have over and over, you have interviews with both Uzbeks and Kyrgyz, and then you
Joldon, I mean,
identify.
sorry for interrupting. Your narrative is spectacular. You put so many things. It's very zoomed in. It's very rich, very granular. But my question was, how do you explain that to somebody kind of who hasn't done this research, who wouldn't be ready to read the 200 plus
Okay.
pages. And I don't know if you have an answer for this because it's quite a challenge. But if you are, for example, in, I don't know, international agency, ICG, for example, right? Like how do you convey the complexity of this situation in
I
30 pages?
I don't know about international organizations, but to ordinary folks, I would explain in a couple of sentences probably. There was a violent outbreak. People get scared because they knew that they cannot expect help from the state, and then they take initiative in their own hands. And out of fear, they responded actually in different ways. That's what I would tell to ordinary folks. For international organization, it's a difficult question. I just I would say that it's always useful to talk to local people, which many organizations do, of course. But it's also very useful to take a comparative approach. And one of the things that I think what made my research more or less reliable is that I tried to do it on very local level. Because of what I saw, like many reports were trying to explain it from national level, from economic deprivation theories and others. But what I see is this is the same causes that they put forward. They were similar for everyone, for every neighborhood, but still we have different outcomes. So this kind of national level causes cannot explain why the same factors can be applicable to one neighborhood, but not applicable to another. So
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we have a question. You said it is important for us to mind that the conflict has indications of both riots and civil war. Can you please elaborate on that? In which way is it important for academic and policy understanding of the events?
yeah, thank you. So when I conducted my first interviews with my respondents, and some of them were calling this a war. At that time, I didn't pay attention to that. Like I thought, like maybe from the point of superiority of being, I thought I'm more knowledgeable than them. I'm more theoretically. So because I read a lot of books, and I thought that they are mistaken. Like they don't use the correct concept. It's not a war; it's a riot. Of course, I didn't tell them that, but over the time, of course, then I realized my mistake. So I shouldn't be so dismissive of respondents' definitions. And actually, I saw that this conflict could be called a war, and it has important implications because when you try to explain conflict, of course, you rely on different theoretical frameworks. And in the beginning, I was hugely relying on riots literature, trying to explain what happened in southern Kyrgyzstan, and of course, ignoring more large-scale conflicts such as civil wars, genocides, and this kind of literature. But then when I realized that it's not just riots, it's a different form of violence, ethnic violence. So, and when I started familiarizing myself with the series of civil war, I saw how much insight they gave me to analyze and to understand this conflict. That's why I think that it's very important to conceptualize the conflicts and the case studies correctly, because it will help researchers to understand the conflict, the nature of the conflict more.
You explore a lot this element of kind of fears and uncertainty. Would you say this kind of the fear of the war kind of pushed for more for escalation or de-escalation of the conflict? Because it can go both ways, right? Like if you're afraid of the war, maybe I'll try to do something about it, or you prepare for the war. And these are different strategies that different neighborhoods basically adopted, right? But kind of the total balance sheet, would you say it kind of helped to prevent it or actually worked in the opposite direction?
Fear, of course, it's an emotion that is not always helpful, and in majority of cases, it's not helpful, I would say. That's actually when I started thinking about this conflict as a war, I started reading about the security dilemma, about fears and commitment problems, non-aggression pacts, and etc. So that's when I speak more on the fear factor. So I think the concept of security dilemma very much rely on the concept of fear, and it's very important to contain fear at the right time and to direct it to different direction. And I think answering to your question, of course, fear is the negative emotion, which more prone to violent escalation than to de-escalation. And I think again, the local communities, they did a great job because they managed to overcome this fear and to de-escalate situations on the neighborhood levels, and the accumulative effect of the local activities was felt on the town level, and then when majority of neighborhoods suppressed violence or controlled their own constituencies, and that's why probably this conflict lasted just few days, but it could be very it would be very probable that conflict would escalate to civil war or to some protracted violent conflict.
Thank you. Well, we have another question. Did you have a chance to go through the biography of community leaders? Given their advanced age, they might have developed friendship relations back in Soviet times and have definitely all made the experience of the 1990s conflict. Did they mention it? Did they gain experience from this first conflict? Did you find any common actors or similar peacemaking dynamics between the 1990 and 2010 conflicts? And well, okay, let's stop here. I'll add one more question.
Okay. This is actually a good observation. Yeah. So these issues were present in my interviews with communal leaders, and from both sides, and Uzbeks and Kyrgyz leaders, they mentioned that they contacted people whom they knew from previous professional activities, and they often mentioned the Soviet times or 90s, that they worked together in Soviet institutions, and that's why it was kind of a connecting link. When in atmosphere of fear, when all connections cut, and there is fear between communities, they don't trust each other. And it was very important that at least some people, and especially the influential people who had links, they could call each other, they had phone numbers of each other, at least they can call and clarify things of what's going on your side, for example, because when you see the violence raging in the city and you see the neighboring community which is arming itself, but it's probably arming itself because they also have fears and they just preparing for defense. But these defense measures are interpreted as a preparation for aggression by other side. And of course, it can lead to escalation of violence and to the spiral of violence. And that's why these links were important, where these community leaders could contact each other and clarify things, get into contact, and then eventually negotiate non-aggression pacts. I think those links played a very prominent role in my interviews.
You have a category of brokers. What's the relationship between the category of community leaders and brokers? And you have a fascinating character of Datka. I don't know, maybe if you can tell us a little bit about her.
So yeah, brokers are often community leaders, but not every community leader is a broker. The brokers are usually people who have connections with everyone in their neighborhood, but they also have strong connection with external communities. They're people of the sort of problem solvers. Usually people come to them, they ask they tell them their problems, and these people fix their problems. And of course, they have these extended networks. And these networks, of course, again, these networks help during these events, again, in the atmosphere of fear, where they have links, they have connections. That a woman that you mentioned, she had different kind of connections. She had connections with she's a Kyrgyz woman, but she has strong connection with Uzbek community leaders, connection with police, and also even with criminal leaders. At some point, the role of criminal leaders is ambiguous in this conflict. Sometimes they caused escalation by looting, by kidnapping, and trying to benefit from chaotic events. But on some cases, they actually helped local leaders to establish orders in their neighborhoods. And that guy is one of the examples where she employed all these options to make peace in her neighborhood. So those who read my article or my book about that has probably, yeah, so they can understand how her networks, her activities helped to keep peace in Kalinin neighborhood.
Thank you so much. I have just been given the floor as the other moderator of the session. My name is Leora. I'm sorry for being late. I am a PhD student at Harvard. And I'm going to share another question that has been asked, which is as follows. Gunsha Anagildieva from Turkmenistan would like to know whether any grassroots organizations were directly involved in the research process, or was it just community leaders or ethnic groups? Also, were the OSCE or any other international organizations involved in any way?
Yes, there was some international, or not international, I would say, non-government organizations, mostly like that helped me a lot with the research actually. And one of the programs, Ынтымақ жарчылары, in English it can be translated as friendship heralds or friendship brokers. So this network of mediators that connected different community leaders, and this program was mostly run after the conflict, but it was already present at the same time in Uzgen. And in many observers argue that Uzgen was peaceful because this network of mediators was already in place there. Because just a little bit of background to Uzgen in 1990, during interethnic conflict between, again, Uzbeks and At that time in 1990, Uzgen was the most violent city in the southern Kyrgyzstan. And when violence broke out, most people expected that the same will happen also in Uzgen, but Uzgen managed to remain peaceful, even though Uzgen is mostly Uzbek town surrounded by Kyrgyz village, but there were no single attack on Uzgen because I think partly because of this mediators program. And I should mention that this mediation program was run under OSCE program. So the OSCE was created this program. At the time, I was deputy director. If I remember, Ross Brown, I think he was the initiator of this program. And so people say that because in Uzgen, they were kind of connected with this program, and people already communicated with each other. Not people, but community leaders. They managed to quickly negotiate non-aggression pacts and control their own communities. And I agree with these observations in one of my chapters in my dissertation. Unfortunately, due to space constraints, this chapter wasn't included in my book, but it is in my dissertation where I discussed the Uzgen case. Yeah. So I mostly I relied on this NGOs, and what was helpful for me as well, they had a list of mediators with phone numbers, and it helped me to choose right people for interviews. So as I was just going through this mediators list and calling them and making them appointment for interviews. I think it was very useful for my research.
Excellent. We have a question here from someone who's spent a lot of time in the region, who has spoken with local academic and governmental officials there in 2010 and 2012. And over the course of these conversations, the topic invariably moved to the external origins of the conflict, which seems to include long-established, powerful, occasionally dangerous forces, such as the separatists, the Bakievs, or the Russians. Did your research address the effects of any of these external groups or the susceptibility of neighborhoods to their influence?
Okay, when I started my research, I decided immediately for myself that I'm not going to deal with this kind of questions where I cannot prove my arguments. So to prove the separatist question, I had to speak to Uzbek leaders who were on the run at the time. Involvement of external powers. It's difficult to distinguish conspiracy theories and what actually happens on the ground. So again, to prove this hypothesis, you need access to right information. And of course, I knew that I'm not gonna get this kind of information, and that's why I decided to focus on the local level, where I can get reliable information. So that's why I would like to say that I didn't engage in the questions of external influences, although I evaluate some factors that influence dynamics of violence in our city, like rumors. For example, there were rumors of invasion of Uzbekistani army that also influenced the dynamics, but that was mostly the side background analysis. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Another question: is the book available in Kyrgyz, Uzbek, or Russian?
Unfortunately, not. So I hope over the time maybe it will be translated into Russian at least, but at the moment, unfortunately, it's only in English version.
Thank you. And one more question that we have is about the segregation of Osh. I don't think this was asked. When you talk about the segregation of the city, do you specifically mean that it is systematically and economically segregated, or just that Kyrgyz and Uzbek populations have chosen to live in the same neighborhoods for cultural and linguistic purposes?
So the segregation in the city of Osh was the result of Soviet planning and administration, in the sense of how they planned the city development and how they built neighborhoods. So traditionally, Uzbeks lived in mahalas. Mahala is how it's understood in Osh. It's usually a traditional Uzbek neighborhood with individual unit houses. Kyrgyz, they live in more like in multi-story apartment complexes, which were built with the industrialization of Osh in southern Kyrgyzstan, when new emerging industries needed labor force, and they built quickly these so-called micro rayons, which are neighborhoods completely comprised of these high-rise buildings. And historically, and because of this Soviet planning, it appears that nowadays Kyrgyz and Uzbek live separate lives, both in terms of spatially and also in terms of social aspects. My observation shows that I've never seen mixed groups of young people communicating with each other, like hanging around. I always see people who are always in their ethnic groups with their co-ethnics. Pretty much these two groups live parallel lives, and the main interaction goes on the level of community leaders. That's why they were so important in this conflict resolution. But I would like to make a remark that the conclusions I made in this book, that community leaders were important for the escalation of violence, they're just relevant to this particular episode of violence. I hope it will never repeat this conflict in the city, but the presence of community leaders cannot guarantee peace with the next time, possible next time, hopefully not, because there are so many factors, and this time the communities managed to avert violence, but the most durable violence should be built on the grassroots levels when ordinary citizens mix and they interact with each other. They know about each other and they have diverse networks. And in this sense, you have segregated nature of the town. And I think at that time in 2010, that was the strategy of community leaders, maybe one of the few options how they could de-escalate the conflict.
Joldon, I have a question. You have a category of ethnic entrepreneurs in the book. Who are these people? My understanding is that Batyrov is one of them, right? So who were these people? How would you kind of define the category? And what's happening now? I mean, today with Sadir Japarov in power, what's happening with kind of local, what's happening with local governance? What kind of ethnic entrepreneurs we have now? It's outside of the scope of the book, but if you could, shed some light on the situation, would be grateful.
I will answer the first part of your question, because the second, unfortunately, I didn't have chance to follow up the situation. Last time I was there, I think 2017, and since then, I actually don't know what's going on the ground, so I cannot give you reliable information regarding the second part of your question. And the first part is about the ethnic entrepreneurs. This concept is, I drew it from theoretical literature. Usually it is, it's used in negative, with negative connotations. So the ethnic entrepreneurs are people who are using their ethnic communities and in general ethnic issues in their own benefit. So these are kind of people who has some influence. They could be community leaders, and usually they are, or politicians who can manipulate these ethnic questions or ethnic communities for several different reasons, for gaining power, for gaining wealth, or for electoral reasons. And there is a lot of literature about that, especially this robust literature on Indian rights, where it showed how local politicians, Hindu politicians, manipulated their local constituencies to instigate intercommunal violence in India. So when I mean ethnic entrepreneurs, I usually have it with negative connotations.
Okay. Well, I don't think we have more questions in the chat.
We have one more.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Someone is mentioning that they're continuing thinking about the author's application of neo-realist understanding of anarchy to these events. Grounded in Hobbesian anarchy, neo-realists see the absence or inability to establish sovereign power by communities, leading to an anarchic state full of violence among those communities. Does this mean that you see the violence in southern Kyrgyzstan as a consequence of the country's weak sovereignty? Moreover, you argue that intercommunal peacemaking stopped the intensification of the violence and possible civil war. This seems to me, to the author, to oppose the neo-realist view that communities are unable to establish peace without a sovereign.
Yeah, I mean, to answer this question, I don't dig deep into political philosophy. My explanation of anarchy is, I define it in simple terms. I approximate international anarchy with the situation in Osh when the state was absent, so it didn't have control over the events. So it was present nominally, but in most of the cases, it couldn't intervene, or wasn't willing to intervene sometimes. Clearly, in many cases, I saw that soldiers were afraid of raging crowds, and they just prefer not to intervene in the conflict. And in this situation, when you don't have state institutions who can control the state, the neighborhoods, and intervene in violence, so it creates a problem of uncertainty and anarchy, and that's why the neighborhoods, they had to think what they should do to avoid violence. And it is, of course, on local level conditions, local level power coalitions that decided which kind of response to choose against particular crisis. But I should say that the crisis was almost similar for every neighborhood. It's just what local conditions and factors that made difference on the ground.
Now we are done with questions.
Yeah. Okay. Two last questions, Joldon. Well, now Central Asian leaders are kind of cooperating more and more, which is a good development, right? Well, the other week, the Kyrgyz-Uzbek and Tajik leaders got together, and now we don't have border disputes in the region. So it seems kind of we are on the right track. Drawing on your research, what would be your recommendations to the leadership of Central Asian countries? That's question one. And second question, what are you working on now after publishing this book? Do you have a new book project? If you can share, of course.
Yeah, sure. So first one is, of course, it's my personal opinion. I think I'm always happy when I hear about the Central Asian political and cultural integration. So the developments are in the right track. I think on the right track could be intensified more. Of course, I cannot provide you expert level opinion on that, but I think these developments they reduce the overall chance of similar ethnic conflicts. And actually, in 2010, President Karimov in Uzbekistan, he decided not to intervene in this conflict, and I think it was a right decision. Otherwise, it would easily turn to regional war, interstate war. I hope these kind of questions will be solved among the leadership, and leadership will take necessary actions to counteract this kind of negative aspects. The second question, yeah, I mean, I have some material that wasn't published. I already mentioned that a chapter with about Uzgen, which is, I think, very interesting. It wasn't included in the book. I would like to publish it as an article, and in my plans also to reflect on my ethnographic fieldwork that I did in Osh, because it's this fieldwork was done in the post-conflict settings. I hope to elaborate some recommendations for researchers who study conflicts or doing research in post-conflict settings. And nowadays, I'm very much interested in technological development. So I think that modern education is far behind of technological developments. So in a way, many universities still offering an education that is already not up to date, with artificial intelligence, with rise of software development and data science. And I think modern education should embrace these new developments. Otherwise, I expect that many students will turn their focus not to traditional universities, but to alternative sources of education. Now, when with artificial intelligence, many people can actually educate themselves and at pretty high level. So I think the universities should catch up with this development, and that's why I'm interested in learning these technologies and to implement this for educational purposes and also for research. For example, data science has very good prospects for increasing the quality of scientific research. I think it's right now not fully appreciated.
Okay. Well, good luck with your new research, and thank you so much for this event and for the book and for the study. I think that's really the most in-depth study of the events. I hope somebody will write something maybe not similar, because we don't have the same access on the events of 1990, the Ocean Uzgen events of 1990. I don't think there is a kind of proper study on that. But I'm digressing. So thank you so much, Joldon, and please keep in touch.
Thank you, Nargis and Leora, for organizing the talk. It was a good platform.
Thank you, Hannah, who is running this behind the scene.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.